The market was full of noise, laughter, and cruel excitement. Bright banners hung above the stalls, and the air smelled of sweat, smoke, and old blood. At the center of the crowd stood a wooden stage, rough and dirty, where chains rattled each time the figure moved. The alien woman was bound by her wrists, her greenish skin marked with old scars. Her eyes were tired but still burning with something no one in the crowd could crush: defiance. The people around her were not there to help. They were there for a cruel show, one that cost nothing more than a coin. The announcer shouted with a sharp voice, $1, one whip, pay and strike her as you please. The crowd roared in approval. Some laughed, some cheered, and some pushed forward with coins clutched in their hands. A heavy-set alien with red scales walked up first, grinning wide, and slapped a silver coin into the announcer's palm. The whip cracked in the air, then landed on the woman's back. Her body shook, but she did not scream. She closed her mouth tight, refusing to give them the sound they wanted. The crowd jeered. "Harder! Make her scream!" another alien shouted. More coins were thrown, more whips raised. Each strike left a dark mark, yet the woman still stood tall, though her legs trembled. Children in the crowd laughed as if it was a festival. For them, this was only entertainment. To the chained woman, it was humiliation, pain, and endless suffering. She had long stopped hoping anyone would save her. Hope was a dangerous dream in this place. But then, among the crowd, a new figure appeared. He was different from the others. He was human. His clothes were simple, worn from travel, and his face was marked by a long scar across his cheek. His eyes did not shine with the cruel joy of the others. His jaw tightened as he watched the whip fall again, and his fists curled at his sides. He stood silent, still, and the crowd hardly noticed him at first. Another coin was tossed. The whip cracked again, tearing at the woman's arm this time. She staggered forward, her knees almost giving out, but she lifted her head and glared at her tormentors. Her eyes burned with anger, and for a second they met the humans. She expected to see the same hunger for cruelty in him. Instead, she saw something else, something she thought no longer existed in this market. Pity, rage, and a promise. The announcer laughed and shouted louder. $1, one whip. Who will be next? Who has the courage to test her strength? Break her pride for the price of a meal? Coins clattered against the stage, and another eager alien pushed forward. He licked his lips and raised the whip high above his head. The human stepped closer, his boots scraping against the dirt. His heart pounded in his chest. He had seen cruelty before, but not like this. An entire crowd celebrating the torture of one helpless soul. He thought of his own people, long ago mocked and called weak when they first entered the galaxy. They had been chained once too. And he remembered the stories of how humans had risen, how they had broken those chains. Watching the woman suffer now felt like watching history repeat itself. He could not let it happen. The whip cracked down again, but before the leather could strike the woman's skin, a strong hand caught it in midair. Gasps burst from the crowd. The human held the whip tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes locked on the cruel alien who held the handle. The alien pulled, but the human did not let go. His voice came low, calm, but filled with fire. Enough. The crowd's laughter faltered. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "A human?" someone hissed. "What is he doing? Is he mad? He'll get himself killed." The announcer shouted angrily, "Step away, off-worlder! You have no part in this show." But the human did not move. He stood tall in front of the chained woman, placing himself between her broken body and the whip. The woman blinked in disbelief. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. She had seen men fight to whip her, to hurt her, to prove themselves. But never had she seen someone step forward to stop it. She could hardly understand what was happening. The alien with the whip snarled and tried to strike again, but the human yanked the weapon from his hands and threw it to the ground. The sound of leather hitting dirt echoed louder than the cheering crowd. The market froze. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by the sound of the woman's chains rattling as she tried to straighten herself. The announcer's face twisted with fury. He pointed at the human and shouted, "You dare interrupt the game? Do you know what you've done?" But the human didn't answer him. Instead, he looked at the alien woman, his voice low but firm. "They won't touch you again." The woman's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave, to run, to save himself before they tore him apart. But no sound left her mouth. Something inside her, long buried, flickered alive again. It was fragile and small, but it was there. Hope. The crowd began to roar, some with anger, some with excitement. Bets were shouted, voices overlapping. Kill him! No, let's see him fight. A human against us? He'll die in seconds. The atmosphere shifted from cruelty to frenzy. The show was no longer just about the alien woman. Now it was about the stranger who dared defy them. The human tightened his stance, every muscle in his body ready. He knew he was outnumbered. He knew one man against the mob was almost suicide. But he also knew something else. The moment he stepped forward, there was no turning back. If he retreated, she would die. If he stood his ground, he might die. But at least, in this place of cruelty, someone would finally fight back. The alien woman watched him, her chest rising and falling fast. Her lips parted at last, and in a voice hoarse from pain, she whispered one word, so soft only he could hear. Why? He didn't answer. Not yet. The answer would come in what he did next. And the crowd leaned forward, waiting, hungry for blood. The alien woman's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths as she stood bound in her chains. Her body was trembling from pain, but her spirit had not broken. When the human caught the whip and stood before her, a strange silence had spread across the market. For the first time in years of torment, she felt something unfamiliar, confusion mixed with a fragile spark of hope. Her dark eyes locked onto his, and she gave him a look that carried two messages at once. A silent plea for rescue, and a warning that stepping in meant death. She knew this place better than anyone. No one defied the market and lived. The human didn't look away. His gaze held steady, strong enough to cut through the noise of the crowd. It was not the look of someone seeking glory or attention. It was the look of someone who had already decided that enough was enough. Still, the alien woman shook her head faintly, barely moving her lips. She mouthed a single word toward him. Don't. She didn't want his blood spilled for her. Yet the firmness in his jaw told her he had already chosen his path. Around them, voices rose like waves. Some laughed at the human's defiance. Others shouted threats, eager for the blood that was sure to come. A sharp voice rang out from the announcer, trying to regain control of the crowd. This is no hero stage. Step back, human, before we cut you down where you stand. But his words only stirred more laughter. Many in the crowd didn't want the human to leave. They wanted him to fight, to be broken, to add to their entertainment. The woman saw the coins flying again as gamblers rushed to place their bets. 100 on the whipmaster, someone shouted. 200 on the human's corpse before sunset. The market was alive with hunger, but not hunger for food. Hunger for cruelty. The human clenched his fists tighter. The memory of history burned in his mind, old stories his grandfather had told him. Once, humans were considered weak, fragile, and unworthy in alien eyes. They had been mocked, chained, and made to bow. But they had fought back. They had clawed their way up with sweat, blood, and fire. And now, staring at this beaten alien woman with her chains cutting into her skin, he felt the same rage that his ancestors must have felt. This was not entertainment. This was the same cruelty, dressed in new clothes. The crowd's jeers grew louder as another alien stepped forward. He was tall, with sharp horns curving from his skull, and he carried the whip like a weapon he had owned all his life. His grin was full of teeth, and he licked his lips as he pointed the handle at the human. Move aside, outsider. This is our game. The human's hand shot out, grabbing the whip's end before the alien could swing it. His grip was iron, refusing to release it, even when the horned alien snarled and tried to jerk it free. The human's voice was calm, but strong enough for everyone to hear. Not anymore. Gasps cut through the noise. The woman stared, stunned by the boldness of this stranger. She had seen dozens of species watch her torture and turn their heads. She had seen others join in, but she had never seen someone interfere. Not like this. Part of her wanted to shout at him, to beg him to run before they killed him. But another part, deep, buried, and aching, wanted him to stay. The horned alien pulled harder, anger burning in his eyes. With a roar, he swung his fist at the human's face. The blow landed, sending the human's head snapping to the side. Blood trickled down his lip, but he did not fall. Instead, he straightened, wiped the blood with the back of his hand, and stared at his attacker with the fire of a man who had already decided that pain meant nothing compared to justice. The crowd erupted into shouts and cheers. Fight him! Break him! Kill the fool! Coins rained down on the dirt as bets doubled and tripled. The announcer shouted for guards, but even he was drowned out by the frenzy. The market wanted a show, and they would not stop until they got it. The woman's heart pounded painfully. She wanted to believe this human could stand against them, but she knew the truth. Alone, he could not win. They would swarm him, beat him, tear him apart. Still, she could not tear her gaze away. For the first time in her life of chains, someone had stepped between her and the whip. And that single act, reckless and doomed as it seemed, was worth more to her than any victory. The human lifted his chin, glaring at the horned alien. If you want her blood, you'll have to go through me. His voice carried no arrogance, only certainty. The horned alien snarled and lunged again, fist swinging. The human moved this time, dodging one blow and blocking the other with his forearm. The impact stung, but he did not break. The woman's lips parted, her voice trembling as she whispered so quietly only she could hear herself. Why would you suffer for me? She could not understand it. She was not his kin, not his kind, not even part of his world. And yet he stood there, bleeding in her place. The crowd pushed closer, forming a circle, their voices deafening. Every movement, every strike was met with shouts. Some laughed, some cursed, and some shouted for the human to be torn apart. The market was no longer about the woman. It was about the man who dared stand in the way. But the human didn't waver. He kept his body between the woman and the mob, his back straight, even as more blood dripped from his lip. He had seen her eyes when the whip fell. He had seen the strength she carried, even in her chains. And he knew that if no one acted today, she would die tomorrow. His choice was made the moment he stepped forward. The announcer's voice cracked with fury as he pointed at the guards. Seize him! Tear him apart! But the crowd's roar was louder, drowning even him. They wanted to see the human fight. They wanted to see how long he could last. The alien woman trembled, torn between fear and wonder. She had whispered for him not to step in, but now, deep in her chest, she prayed that he would not step back. The whipmaster's anger boiled over as he lost control of his own weapon. His pride had been wounded before the entire market, and he could not allow that insult to stand. With a guttural roar, he lunged at the human, his sharp claws aiming for the man's throat. The crowd gasped, and the circle of onlookers tightened, eager for blood. The human braced himself and met the charge head-on. He raised his arms, blocking the first strike, but the alien's strength was brutal. The claws raked across his forearm, leaving deep scratches that oozed red. Pain flared, but the human did not step back. Instead, he twisted his body and slammed his fist into the alien's jaw. The sound of bone cracking rang through the air, followed by a stunned silence, then an explosion of cheers. Half the crowd howled in laughter, while the other half shouted curses. Some cheered for the alien, others began betting on the human, as if his defiance had suddenly turned into a new form of entertainment. The alien staggered but did not fall. Snarling, he charged again, fists pounding, claws slashing. The human dodged what he could and blocked what he couldn't. His knuckles bled from the impact, and bruises bloomed across his skin. But each time he was struck, he returned the blow with greater force. His body was battered, but his spirit was iron. The alien woman behind him could barely breathe. Each strike that landed on the human felt like a strike on her own body. She wanted to cry out, to beg him to stop, but her voice stuck in her throat. She had told him not to get involved, and yet he had. Now he was bleeding because of her, and her heart twisted in pain. But even through the fear, something inside her stirred, something she had buried long ago. Respect. The whipmaster grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it at the human's head. The rock struck his temple, and the man stumbled, his vision flashing white. The crowd screamed with delight. He's going down! He'll die like the rest! But the human didn't fall. He steadied himself, wiping the blood from his brow, and raised his fists again. His lips curved into a grim line, as if daring them to try harder. The market guards stepped forward, spears in hand, but the announcer raised a hand to stop them. His greedy eyes shone. No, he barked. Let them fight. Let the people watch. He smelled profit in the air. The more the fight lasted, the more coins would be thrown, and the richer he would grow. The whipmaster roared in fury, charging once more. His claws tore through the human's shirt, ripping cloth and flesh. Blood spilled across the dirt, but before the alien could strike again, the human surged forward, ignoring the pain. He slammed his shoulder into the alien's chest, knocking the wind out of him, then followed with a punch that sent him sprawling backward. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in wild excitement. The human stood panting, chest heaving, blood dripping down his arm and face. But his back was still turned toward the woman, shielding her completely. He had not moved from his place before her, as though his only purpose was to stand as a wall between her and the world. The alien woman felt her throat tighten. She could not remember the last time someone had stood for her. Not since her people had been defeated, not since she had been dragged here in chains. The whipmaster struggled to his feet, his pride more wounded than his body. He spat blood into the dirt and hissed, "You'll regret this, human. You can't fight us all." His words only made the crowd hungrier. They wanted more. They wanted to see who would fall first, the stubborn human or the enraged alien. The human's voice came low and steady. "If I fall, it won't be on my knees." His words carried weight, like steel forged in fire. The crowd fell quiet for a heartbeat before bursting again into cheers and laughter. Some mocked him, others shouted his name, and many simply threw more coins to feed the storm. The whipmaster attacked again, faster this time, claws flashing in the air. The human ducked low, his body moving with desperate instinct, and drove his fist into the alien's ribs. A sickening crack followed, and the whipmaster cried out in pain. He staggered back, clutching his side, and the crowd screamed louder than ever. But the fight was not over. Another alien from the crowd, drunk on excitement, leapt onto the stage with a snarl. "I'll finish the human myself," he shouted. The human turned quickly, but the alien was larger, his arms thick as tree trunks. He slammed into the human, knocking him to the ground. Dust flew as the man hit the dirt, his body aching, his vision spinning. The alien woman gasped, chains rattling as she struggled to move forward, as though her body refused to stay still any longer. Her eyes burned with helpless fury. For years she had believed no one cared for her, that no one would ever risk their life for her. And now here was a human, fighting 2 against 1, bloodied and broken, yet refusing to let her fall alone. The human coughed, pushed himself up, and struck the second alien across the face. The blow echoed, and the larger alien stumbled, dazed. The crowd roared, some in shock, others in wild excitement. No one had expected a lone human to last this long, yet here he was, still standing, still fighting, still refusing to back down. The woman's whisper carried through the chaos, though no one heard it but herself. Why? Why me? Her eyes softened even through the tears and pain. She could not understand his choice, but deep in her heart, she knew this man was not fighting just for her body. He was fighting for her dignity, for the simple truth that no living being should be treated as a toy for cruelty. The announcer's face twisted in fury and greed as he watched the fight grow bloodier. The human, bleeding but unbroken, pulled himself to his feet once again. His body swayed with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. He would not let them win. He would not let her break. The crowd sensed something shifting. This was no longer just a game. It was becoming a battle that carried weight, a fight that meant something beyond their cruel entertainment. And though many still cheered for his death, others found themselves holding their breath, wondering if the impossible could happen, that a human, alone and outnumbered, could stand against them all. Blood dripped down the human's face, running into his eyes, but he refused to fall. Each breath came heavy, but his fists were still clenched tight. The crowd around the stage had gone wild, their cheers and laughter mixing into a storm of sound. Some shouted for his death, some shouted for him to keep fighting, and others only threw coins as if this was the greatest entertainment they had ever seen. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the stink of greed. The alien woman behind him stared at his back, her body trembling in chains. Her own pain was forgotten as she watched the man bleed for her. Every strike he took, every drop of blood, made her chest tighten. She had told him not to interfere, yet here he was, refusing to move aside. She whispered to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear, "Why don't you leave me? Why suffer for me?" But her whisper was lost in the roar of the crowd. The whipmaster lay groaning in the dirt, his ribs broken, his pride shattered. The second alien, who had tried to join the fight, crawled away holding his jaw, humiliated. The crowd had come to see a helpless woman whip for sport, but now they were watching something far more dangerous, a human refusing to break. Then the sound of heavy boots echoed through the market. The laughter dimmed. Whispers spread. The Baron is here. From the far end of the square, a figure emerged. The Baron was huge, towering over the crowd, his body covered in layers of black armor decorated with golden chains. His face was hidden behind a mask carved with cruel designs, but his voice was enough to freeze the air. It was deep, filled with authority and menace. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who dares spoil my game?" The crowd bowed their heads or lowered their eyes, afraid to anger him. Only the human stood tall, his chest heaving, but his gaze steady. He said nothing, but his presence was answer enough. The Baron stepped onto the stage, his boots thudding like war drums. His eyes, burning red behind the mask, landed on the human. "You interfere in my business, off-worlder? You bleed on my soil for a slave that is mine to break?" His voice cut like a blade, and the silence in the market was heavy. The human finally spoke, his words simple but firm. "She is not yours." Gasps rose from the crowd. No one had ever spoken to the Baron that way. The alien woman's lips parted in shock. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to scream at him to stop, to keep his head down, to live. But her throat locked tight. The Baron let out a low laugh, deep and cruel. "Not mine," he said, circling the human like a predator. "Everything in this market is mine. Every coin, every chain, every cry of pain belongs to me. And you think you can stand against me?" The crowd began to murmur, restless. Some whispered that the human was a fool. Others wondered if perhaps he had some hidden strength. A few, though, felt something stir in their hearts. Admiration. They would never admit it aloud, but to see a man stand against the Baron lit a fire they had long forgotten. The Baron stopped and raised his hand. Guards with long spears moved forward instantly, their armor clanking as they surrounded the stage. The announcer smirked, his voice dripping with venom. "Kill him now! End this little show!" But the Baron lifted a hand to silence him. His glowing eyes narrowed at the human. "No," he said slowly, his tone sharp with amusement. "The crowd wants blood, yes, but not a quick death. They want to fight. They want to see if this human can bleed enough to satisfy them." The announcer grinned, rubbing his hands together as the crowd roared louder than ever. They shouted the words like thunder. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Coins rained down again, a storm of silver and gold clattering against the ground. The Baron's greed burned brighter. The human's chest rose and fell, each breath steadying him. He knew this was no longer just a brawl. This was a trap, a spectacle. He was one man against a giant machine of cruelty. But his eyes flicked to the woman, chained and broken, and he knew retreat was impossible. The Baron leaned closer, his voice low, but carrying through the air. "You want her freedom? Then fight for it. Defeat my champion, and she walks away. Fail, and both of you die here in the dirt." The alien woman gasped, shaking her head violently, her chains rattling. "No," she cried out for the first time, her voice hoarse. "Don't do this. They'll kill you." The human turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his eyes. There was no fear in them, only resolve. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any words. The Baron straightened and raised his arms to the crowd. "You heard me! A duel! The human against my champion!" The marketplace shook with cheers, the people wild with excitement. Bets doubled, voices screamed, and the ground itself seemed to tremble with their hunger for blood. The Baron pointed at the human. "If you win, Slave Girl walks free. If you lose, your body will hang from my gates for all to see." The human's fists clenched tighter, blood still dripping from his wounds. His voice came steady, hard as stone. "I accept." The crowd erupted into madness, their cries echoing through every corner of the market. Some laughed, calling him a dead man walking. Others shouted his name, hungry to see the impossible. The alien woman shook her head again, tears sliding down her face. She had been beaten, whipped, and humiliated for years, yet nothing hurt her more than watching him step willingly into this doom for her sake. The Baron turned away, already smiling beneath his mask. He knew his champion was unmatched. He knew no human could possibly win. This was no contest, only entertainment. And yet, in the center of the stage, the human stood like a wall of flesh and blood, refusing to bend. The alien woman whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. Why? Why risk everything for me? She had no answer, and neither did the crowd. But the human knew. His answer was carved into his scars, burned into his blood, and shown in the way he refused to bow. The fight had only just begun, and he was ready to meet it with everything he had. The crowd shook with excitement, their voices rising like thunder as the Baron's words spread through the market. Everyone knew what was about to happen. The human had accepted the impossible challenge, and now there would be no escape. The alien woman's chains rattled as she pulled against them, her body trembling, not from fear of pain, but from fear for him. She had suffered every cruelty this place could offer, but this was different. This man was not like the others. He was not laughing, not feeding on her torment. He was standing for her, bleeding for her. And now he was walking towards certain death. The announcer's voice boomed through the air. A duel! The human dares to fight the Baron's champion. His words poured like oil onto a fire. The crowd roared, their hunger for violence exploding. Some cheered the human's bravery, others mocked him for his foolishness, but all were eager to see blood spill. The announcer grinned, his sharp teeth flashing. If the human wins, the slave walks free. If he loses, both die where they stand. The Baron raised his hand, and the noise died. He looked at the human as if staring at a worm daring to rise against a storm. You have chosen death, human. But since you want to make it a show, I will give you what you want. He gestured behind him, and the ground shook with heavy footsteps. The champion stepped forward. He was massive, twice the size of the human, with 4 thick arms bulging with muscle. His skin was dark and rough like stone, and his eyes glowed faintly yellow in the torchlight. In one hand, he carried a spiked whip, in another a long curved blade, while the other 2 arms flexed with deadly strength. The crowd screamed louder at the sight of him, chanting his name again and again. The alien woman's breath caught in her throat. She had seen the champion fight before. He had killed dozens in this arena, breaking bones and spilling blood with ease. None had lasted more than a few minutes against him. Even the strongest had fallen quickly, their screams cut short by his weapons. She wanted to cry out again, to beg the human to surrender, but the words stuck in her chest. She knew he would never step back now. The human's eyes stayed locked on the champion, steady and unshaken. His fists were raw, his lips split, and his body covered in blood, yet he stood tall. Every inch of him burning with determination. He spoke, his voice carrying through the tense silence. If I win, she goes free. You made that promise. The Baron chuckled behind his mask. Yes, human, and if you lose, her death will be slower than yours. His voice made the crowd cheer with delight. The wager was set. The fight was sealed. The announcer raised his arm high and shouted, "Let the duel begin." The champion wasted no time. He swung the spiked whip with a deafening crack, the air itself hissing as the metal tips slashed forward. The human rolled to the side, the whip tearing into the ground where he had stood. Dust flew, and the crowd screamed with joy. The champion swung again, this time faster, and the spikes grazed the human's shoulder, tearing skin and drawing fresh blood. The human gritted his teeth but kept moving, circling, searching for an opening. He knew brute strength alone could not match the champion. He had to use his mind, his speed, his will. The alien woman's eyes followed every step, her chains rattling as she leaned forward. Each strike from the champion was meant to kill, but the human dodged again and again, his body moving with desperate precision. Sweat mixed with blood, but his focus never broke. The crowd roared louder with each close call, their voices echoing like a storm. The champion suddenly lunged forward, using all 4 arms at once. The whip lashed, the blade swung, and his fists came crashing down. The human barely escaped, the blade cutting across his side, leaving a burning wound. He stumbled, blood soaking his shirt, but he did not fall. Instead, he pushed back, striking the champion in the chest with all his strength. The blow barely moved the giant, but the crowd howled at the audacity. The Baron watched silently, his eyes glowing with cruel amusement. To him, this was already decided. No human could defeat his champion. But the longer the fight dragged on, the louder the crowd became. The more coins filled the market. And so he let it continue, his greed enjoying every second. The champion swung the whip again, faster and harder. This time, the human caught it mid-swing. The crowd gasped in shock as his hands bled against the spikes. But he held on, yanking with all his strength. The whip was torn from the champion's hand and landed in the dirt. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts, their voices split between awe and rage. The alien woman's eyes widened, her chest heaving. For the first time, she believed he might have a chance. She whispered under her breath, "Fight, human, fight!" The champion roared in fury, charging with his blade raised high. The human stepped aside at the last moment, slamming his elbow into the giant's ribs. The strike staggered the massive alien for a second, and the crowd screamed louder than ever. The fight had become more than a battle for survival. It was a war of spirit. The human's every movement said he would not bend, he would not break, no matter the cost. The woman's heart pounded as she watched. She had been nothing but a slave, beaten and humiliated, but this human was forcing the entire market to see her life as something worth fighting for. The Baron leaned back, his voice a low growl. "Enjoy this moment, human. It will be your last." But the human did not hear him. His eyes stayed on the champion, his body battered but unyielding. Around him, the crowd roared, coins clattered, and blood stained the dirt, but none of it mattered. He was fighting not for glory, not for survival alone, but for the freedom of the broken woman behind him. The alien woman whispered again, her voice shaking with something she had not felt in years. Hope. It was only one word, but it was enough. The duel had just begun, and though the human bled, he was still standing, still fighting, still defying them all. The ground shook each time the champion moved. His 4 massive arms swung like hammers, the curved blade flashing under the torchlight, the spiked whip now gone, but his strength still terrifying. He roared with rage, his voice echoing through the market like thunder, and the crowd answered him with wild screams of excitement. The human stood before him, body bloody and bruised, every breath sharp and painful, but his eyes held the same fire. He had come too far to give up now. The champion charged, faster than anyone thought such a large body could move. His blade slashed downward, aiming to split the human in two. At the last second, the human rolled aside, the edge cutting deep into the dirt where he had stood. Dust and stone exploded upward. Before the champion could pull the blade free, the human kicked hard at his knee. The massive alien staggered, surprised but did not fall. He swung a heavy fist, and it crashed into the human's ribs with the sound of cracking bone. The human flew backward, landing on the ground with a hard thud, coughing blood. The crowd roared, chanting the champion's name. "Finish him! Crush the human!" The Baron leaned forward, amused, certain the end was near. The alien woman felt her chest tear apart. She shook her head, tears running down her dirty face, her chains clattering as she whispered, "Get up! Please get up!" The human groaned, every bone screaming in pain, but he planted his hands in the dirt and pushed himself up. Blood dripped from his lip, his body swayed, but he stood again. The crowd gasped. Many had expected him to stay down, but his legs refused to give way. The champion snarled, angered that his strike had not finished the fight. The human raised his fists again, his voice hoarse but strong. "I'm not done." His words cut through the noise, silencing some in the crowd. For a moment, the air was heavy, as if even the marketplace itself listened. The champion rushed forward once more, using all 4 arms in a deadly storm. One fist slammed into the ground where the human had stood a heartbeat before. Another swipe of the blade nearly cut his arm, grazing his skin and leaving blood flowing. The third strike came too close, and the human had no time to dodge. Instead, he grabbed a wooden pole broken from the arena floor and raised it just in time. The blow shattered the wood into splinters, but it slowed the attack enough for him to slip away. The crowd exploded, shouting louder, throwing coins, their excitement shaking the air. Some laughed at the human's hopeless struggle, others cheered him on with unexpected fire. For the first time, the market was divided, half wanting his death, half secretly hoping he could do the impossible. The Baron's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, watching carefully. This was lasting longer than he had planned, longer than any fight with his champion should last. But his greed forced him to allow it. The longer the fight continued, the more the people paid, the more the market grew alive. Still, his voice rumbled low, a warning meant only for himself. End it soon. The human's chest burned with every breath, his ribs aching, blood soaking through his shirt. Yet his mind stayed clear. He knew brute strength would never defeat the champion. He needed more than fists. He needed to use the champion's own power against him. The champion roared again and swung the blade in a wide arc. The human ducked, the edge passing inches from his head, and then he rushed forward, too close for the giant to swing again. With all his strength, the human drove his elbow into the alien's throat. The champion gagged, stumbling backward, gasping for air. The crowd screamed in shock, some standing, unable to believe what they were seeing. The alien woman's eyes widened. Her heart raced faster with each desperate strike the human made. For so long she had believed her life was worth nothing, only chains and pain. But now this stranger was proving to everyone that her freedom was worth bleeding for. Her lips moved without thinking, whispering again and again, "Fight, fight, fight!" The champion, enraged, swung wildly with his fists. The human ducked one blow, but could not dodge the other. The massive punch smashed into his chest, and he collapsed to his knees, coughing blood into the dirt. The crowd shouted louder than ever, convinced it was over. The Baron stood tall, spreading his arms as if to declare victory already. But the human did not stay down. His hand clenched into a fist, pressing against the ground. Slowly, painfully, he rose again. His eyes glared at the champion with the fire of a man who had already decided death was not enough to stop him. The crowd gasped again. This was no longer just a fight. It was a story. The champion screamed with fury, swinging the blade once more. But this time, the human was ready. He sidestepped, grabbed a length of chain lying in the dirt, and looped it around the champion's arm. With all his strength, he pulled, twisting the massive alien's limb. The champion roared in pain as his own weight carried him forward. He stumbled, crashing against the wooden beams of the stage. The human yanked again, forcing the champion's blade into the post where it stuck. The crowd erupted in chaos, half cheering, half screaming. The announcer's voice cracked with excitement. "The human has trapped him!" The champion roared, trying to free his blade, but in the moment of weakness, the human struck. His fists pounded into the giant's face and chest, each blow echoing like thunder. Blood splattered, dust rose, and the giant staggered, stunned for the first time. The alien woman's eyes filled with tears, her heart racing. She could not look away. For the first time, she believed he might actually do it. That this broken, bleeding human might accomplish the impossible. The Baron slammed his fist into the armrest of his seat, his voice a low growl. This fight has gone too far. He rose to his feet, his anger burning through the mask. But the crowd was louder than him, chanting wildly, "Human! Human! Human!" The human's body was near breaking, his strength almost gone. But his mind was sharp, his will unbroken. He tightened the chain one last time, forcing the champion to his knees. The crowd screamed, the woman gasped, and for a heartbeat, the market froze. The human whispered through bloodied lips, his voice only loud enough for the champion to hear. "Your strength is your weakness." And with a final surge of effort, he pulled harder, sending the massive alien crashing face first into the dirt. The ground shook as the champion fell, unmoving. The crowd exploded into chaos, some screaming in disbelief, others roaring in wild praise. The human stood above the fallen giant, swaying, broken, but still alive. The alien woman stared at him, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, her chains felt lighter. For the first time, she dared to believe in freedom. The marketplace was silent for the first time since the fight had begun. Dust hung in the air, and the heavy body of the champion lay face down in the dirt. His four arms twitched once before going still. The human stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds, his body swaying like it might collapse at any second. Yet, he did not fall. His fists were still clenched, his back still straight. The crowd stared in disbelief. They had come to see an alien woman whipped until she broke. They had expected to laugh at her pain, to bet coins on her screams, but instead, they had witnessed something none of them had ever imagined. A human, beaten and bloodied, bringing down the Baron's strongest warrior. The silence lasted only a breath before the marketplace exploded into chaos. Half the crowd screamed with rage, furious that the champion had fallen. The other half roared with excitement, cheering the human's name as if he had been one of their own. Coins clattered across the dirt, bets forgotten in the madness. The announcer's jaw dropped, his voice stuttering, unable to find the words. The alien woman stared at the human's back. Tears blurred her vision, running down her scarred cheeks. She had thought she would die chained, nameless, forgotten in this place of cruelty. But now someone had fought for her. Someone had bled for her. Someone had looked at her and seen more than a slave. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He won. He really won." The Baron rose slowly from his seat, his massive body tense with fury. His red eyes burned through the mask as he stepped forward, the weight of his presence silencing the crowd once more. His voice came deep and sharp, like thunder ready to break the earth. This was not supposed to happen. The human turned to face him, blood dripping down his chin, his body shaking from exhaustion. Yet his voice was steady when he spoke. "The fight is done. She walks free." The crowd waited, holding their breath. Every deal made in the Baron's market was law. Even he could not break it without losing the people's fear. But his pride twisted his face behind the mask, and his voice dripped with venom. "You dare demand from me, human? You dare remind me of my own words?" The people stirred uneasily. Some shouted for the Baron to honor the agreement. Others stayed silent, afraid of his wrath. But the chant began again, small at first, then growing louder. "Free her! Free her! Free her!" The Baron raised his hand, and the guards moved forward, their spears glinting. The human lifted his fists again, though his arms trembled with the effort. He knew he could not fight an army, but his stance told everyone watching that he was ready to try. The alien woman's heart pounded. She rattled her chains, her voice hoarse but strong this time. "You promised." Her cry cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd heard it. "He won! I am free!" The people shouted again, louder now, their voices crashing together in one demand. "Free her! Free her!" Even those who hated the human could not deny the law of the wager. To break it would shatter the Baron's control, and everyone knew it. The Baron's glowing eyes narrowed, his fury burning hotter than fire. He stared at the human, then at the crowd, and finally at the chained woman. At last, with a voice like gravel, he snarled, "Release her." The guards hesitated, but the Baron roared, "Now!" One by one, the chains fell from the alien woman's wrists. The heavy metal hit the ground with a sound that rang in her ears like music. Her arms shook as she pulled them forward, touching her skin where the iron had cut for so long. She stumbled, her legs weak from years of captivity, and would have fallen if not for the man who stepped forward and caught her. She collapsed against him, her face pressing into his chest. For a moment, she forgot the crowd, the Baron, the guards. All she could feel was the steady beat of his heart, strong and alive, a sound she thought she would never hear this close again. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You gave me back my life." The human looked down at her, his eyes soft despite the blood and pain. He said nothing, but his arms tightened around her as if promising that no chain would ever hold her again. The crowd was split, some furious, some awed, some still shouting his name. But the Baron stood tall, his voice low and dangerous. "You may have won today, human, but do not think this is over. I do not forgive. I do not forget." The human met his gaze without fear. His voice was steady, though his body could barely stand. "I'm not afraid of you." The Baron's eyes blazed brighter, but he did not strike. The people were watching, their chants still echoing. To act now would shatter his control. Instead, he turned sharply and stormed away, his guards following like shadows. The announcer finally found his voice, shouting, "The fight is done! The human has won! The slave is free!" His words carried over the crowd, sealing the outcome. The woman lifted her head, her eyes meeting the human's. She saw not just a fighter, not just a savior, but something greater. A man who had chosen to stand when no one else would. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, the first she had given in years. The human swayed, nearly falling, but she held him up with what little strength she had. Together, they stood on the stage, broken but unbroken, free in a way neither had thought possible. Around them, the market buzzed with voices, but the moment belonged only to them. The chains were gone, the crowd silenced, the Baron defeated in spirit, if not in body. And though danger still waited beyond the square, for this single heartbeat in time, the alien woman was free, and the human had proven that one act of courage could shake an empire of cruelty.